Good evening. The hour of 6 p.m. having arrived, I will call to order this regular meeting of the Planning, Licenses, and Development Committee. This meeting is being broadcast live on Channel 1302. The video is also posted on the city website by the end of the next business day, barring any technical difficulties. Anyone wishing to view a copy of the agenda and supporting materials will find it on the city website. If you are in the audience tonight, you may access the agenda from any mobile device. Copies of the printed agenda are available in the wall pockets just as you enter the meeting room. To receive electronic copies of future agenda packets, please go to the homepage and subscribe to the city meetings email list. The public and other city councilors will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda items under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. I will not recognize an individual a second time until everyone who wishes has had a chance to speak. Once a motion has been made and seconded, only committee members and the public can speak. Councilors in attendance will have an opportunity at the next council meeting. Anyone who wishes to address the committee is asked to go to one of the microphones in the room and identify themselves by their name and address prior to speaking. Written comments from the public will be accepted at the city clerk's office until Tuesday at 1 p.m. I will now call to order the regular meeting of the Planning, Licenses, and Development Committee and declare a quorum present. All right, and we have no one participating remotely this evening, so we're just going to jump right into our agenda. Our first item, I'm sorry? No. So our first item under on our agenda tonight is Danya Landis and Machina Arts and Machina Kitchen and Arts Bars request to serve alcohol at the Sidewalk Cafe.
Hi, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you for being here.
Can you just state your names and address and for the minute taker, please?
Yeah, I brought Brooke with me, so I'll let her go first.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Brooke Shoemate, and I live at 12 West Street, apartment 15.
Great, thank you.
So I'm Danya Landis. I'm one of the owners at Machina Kitchen and Art Bar, and I live at 433 Elm Street in Keene.
Wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about your request tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are requesting to serve alcohol on our Sidewalk Cafe. Having a outdoor cafe has been incredibly valuable to our business, and we're very thankful for the past 2 years and being able to do that. And so we're hoping to move forward and continue with that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And is there someone from the city that's going to address this as well?
I will.
Wonderful. City manager?
So this is the first request for permission to serve alcohol on the sidewalk. It's the one time that this request comes to City Council. Here on out, it would be approved administratively. The reason they're coming now instead of 2 years ago is because during COVID, we had some flexibility under the emergency management order, and so they were operating under that order for both their sidewalk license and the sale of alcohol on the sidewalk.
Okay, wonderful. So once this is approved, this will fold back into their Sidewalk Cafe license. Okay, do we have any questions from the committee? Seeing none, do we have any questions from the public? Okay, I would entertain a motion.
Certainly. Move to recommend the Machina Kitchen Art Bar be granted permission to serve alcoholic beverages in connection with their Sidewalk Cafe license, subject to the customary licensing requirements of City Council, in compliance with the requirements of Section 46-1191 and through Section 46.1196 of the City Code.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilor Giacomo, a second by Councilor Ormerod. Do we have any questions on that motion? Anyone from the public? Anyone from Machina? Okay, great. Seeing none, I would ask for a vote. All in favor? And that is unanimous. So that part is taken care of, and I think you'll just be working with the city to formalize the Sidewalk Cafe license portion.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you all very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, and coming out for this lovely evening.
Of course. Yeah.
All right, so it looks like we have another one of these. Do we have Gail Summers from YASO?
Oh, sure.
Come on forward, thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone.
Hi, Gail. Can you just state your name and address for us?
Sure. My name is Gail Summers, 5 Orchard Street, Keene, New Hampshire.
Great, and can you tell us a little bit about your request?
Sure. So as owner of Yasso Jamaican Grill. I'm here to request permission to serve alcohol at our sidewalk cafe. For the last 2 years, we have found that it has been a very valuable part of our business, and more importantly, we have done so within the last 2 years without any incident. And I think it's a bit prudent and certainly appreciated if we're able to continue to do so.
Great, thank you for that. And city manager, similar situation?
Very similar.
Okay, so again, we were operating under emergency management orders originally, so we're looking to add this component back in.
Yes.
And it would get folded back into the normal cafe license that would be issued by administration, right? Great. Do we have any questions from the committee or from the public? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Move to recommend that Yasso Jamaican Grill be granted permission to serve alcoholic beverages in connection with their sidewalk cafe license, subject to the customary licensing requirements of the City Council and compliance with the requirements of Section 46-1191 through 46-1196 of the City Code.
I'll second it.
Thank you. I have a motion by Councillor Giacomo, a second by Councillor Johnson. Any questions on that motion? Anyone from the public? Seeing none, I would ask for a vote. All in favor? Again, that is unanimous. Great. So then I would just suggest being back in touch with the city about formalizing the rest of the licensing, and it sounds like it's going to work out for both of you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out.
All right. So the next item on our agenda is the Keene Young Professionals Network Keene Food Festival. Request to use city property. Hello, gentlemen.
Well, we've got Alana Fierro as well, who's the president for KYPN with us as well, but we don't have 3 seats, so I don't know if I can.
We can
If
bring
Alana
them.
wants to join us at a microphone, we do have a standing microphone available.
That works?
Okay.
Great. All right, so let's start with introductions. Who do we have with us?
So I'll start. I'm Alana Fierro. I'm the Keene Young Professionals Network president, and I live at 744 West Swansea Road in Swansea.
Great, thank you.
Michael Romy, counselor at large.
Thank you.
Med Kopczynski, Director Economic Development, Special Projects and Initiatives.
Wonderful. So I don't know who wants to start. Councilor Remy or Alana, would you like to explain your request to us?
Sure. So the event overall, so we are looking to expand the footprint for the primary request and say that we want to close all the way to Railroad Street, expand and have more vendors in there. We have been working with some of the local businesses, partnering with Art Walk to try to figure out the right footprint, the right layout. We actually got some really good feedback. We're going to start filling in on the street, on the inside parts of the street. So we're going to start filling in the median first as we fill it up so that we leave the businesses open to the street as much as we can. If we have a few or more restaurants that want to come down, then we have space for, we can still use those spaces. But the idea is to leave those largely open so you can still see the businesses and not impede those businesses on that are on the sides of Main Street. It's not quite as possible around Central Square, so we're still the same plan around Central Square. Same plan around the beer area, which is off city property, so we don't need to worry about that for this, but just as part of the footprint, as we had last year. And yeah, coordinated with Art Walk to try to connect our events. They're going to help fill in some spaces as we have available with some of their artists and kind of condense their artists up into this footprint instead of spreading them all the way down Main Street to try to kind of build the connection between the two events a little bit. But other than that, we're going to go a little earlier start and a little earlier end because some of the restaurants gave feedback that it was a little tough to get ready for dinner service with the last one where it ended right at 5. Jumping into dinner service was tricky, but they pulled it off. But we're going to end a little earlier this year to try to make up for that.
And I would just add, last year we held it successfully without incident.
All right.
We gave back almost $50,000, and with some of the sponsors we had, it was a little bit over that to the local restaurants as part of it. So.
Well, that's wonderful. Very impressive. Do we have some feedback from the city?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank Court Blomquist for giving me the opportunity to fill in for him tonight. It's difficult for him to let someone take this type of event. He's so positive in bringing them forward. As we know, he is the emergency management director when he's filling this seat in this particular regard. But as the economic development director, it gives me a chance to laud those events that have been successful and, you know, the events that we want to see take place in our downtown, which we're seeing more and more and more of them. I want to applaud both Art Walk and the Young Professionals Network in combining their efforts, because we did run into some conflicts last year where we hadn't had that conversation. But we've had good conversations along these lines. You know, the parking spaces that are being taken up as part of this event, it's a minor bit of what we're doing to make sure that our downtown is vital. Last year we had thousands of people come into our downtown. We're going to have thousands more. Last year was a great event. This is going to be a great event. We've had 2 separate meetings already on this. There's some details yet to be worked out, but by all means, this is something that we should go forward with. And this is the fun part of my job, when I can do this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that feedback.
Okay.
Do we have any questions from the committee at this time? Councilor Giacomo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did see that the timing was shifted on this. Is it shifted earlier, or is it the time actually condensed?
It was noon to 5, it's now 11:30 to 4, so yes to both.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
um,
And will that have any, and I guess this is something that probably is more of maybe a court/med question, but what effect will that have on the back end of the festival as far as breakdown? Since we're obviously starting breakdown earlier, will the streets have an opportunity? Will they be opened up by, what's the plan, by 7 this year? Or is it by 8:30 or something, again, like it was last year was the plan? We beat the time last year, but.
Yeah, the intent would still be to shoot for that earlier time. We want to pull it back a little bit, but we will open it as soon as we can after the streets are clear. We have to work with Public Works. We did a nice walk around last year. One of the restaurants on Main Street did not realize they had to clean up they thought they could remain serving on Main Street, which was kind of interesting. It was really nice setup that they had, so I didn't even notice that it was there, but when we were going around to do cleanup, we had a little bit of a scramble to get that off the street.
Sure.
So, sorry.
Okay.
You know, there are some coordination issues yet to be worked out. We have some turning movements we've got to be sure of, depending on how we block things off. We've got 144 spaces that are going to be blocked off for some period of time. We've got to get them open as soon as we can. We have to direct traffic for parking, not only on Main Street, but to Gilboa Avenue, to both the commercial lot and the Gilboa lot. We've got to do some work on directing some of our traffic, in this case being event traffic, potentially to Upper Deck of Wells. So there's a lot of coordination issues yet to be had, but they're quite minor, quite frankly.
And that was kind of where I was leading with that as well, with the footprint expanding down Main Street. Will that impact is it essentially the same number of barricades? I'm trying to picture it, but it sounds like it's going to be a little bit more of an effort for setup and shut down from a Public Works perspective with the larger footprint now.
Less.
There are a few, kind of. So there are a few less from a width perspective, but there are a few other side streets we have to worry about. So Railroad Street, and actually even here on Church Street, you got to make sure no one can come onto the street through Church Street, through the bank. There's a few other components to worry about in there. So we are expecting from the city incremental costs, but we've agreed as part of the motion to cover any cost above what the city provided through the finance motion that went through separately already.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to this happening. Does this cut out a lot of people that are working? It's ending pretty early, and
It's a Saturday, so we're hoping we can still get a pretty
Okay.
good group, but it's 11:30 to 4 on the Saturday, so hopefully we get a good afternoon group.
okay, thank you.
And out of curiosity, have there been any plans for any special contests?
We're working on a hot something contest. It might not be peppers this year, but
Okay.
something spicy, hopefully.
I know, I think we heard a lot of buzz about that last year.
The hot peppers were incredibly difficult to source. It's a little, if we were doing this in the fall, this would be it'd be easy to do the hot
Prime
peppers.
pepper time.
It's hard to do in spring to get them ready for then, but There's a couple things we learned from the last one around the tokens and things like that. So it was $2 a token for everything last year. That's the plan for this year again. We previously had done a separate ticketing system for the beer tent, which led to some complexity. We're looking at revising that to potentially be under one token system, so you wait in one line, you don't have to wait in two. We're working on a couple different things to try to fine tune some of those edges that, the bumps you learned in the first year. So we're working through some of those pieces.
Well, it sounds like you held a very successful event the first year, and you get to iron out some of these little details, and I feel like the committee's, excited to support this. So do we have anyone from the public who has any comments? Come on up. Just state your name and address for the minute taker, please.
Anya Landis, 433 Elm Street, Keene, New Hampshire.
Go
And
ahead.
I want to say, as a restaurant owner, this event was amazing. And you get very few opportunities to get in front of that many people at once, and especially with the pandemic, it's been really difficult to reach people and to have that community feel. So this really gave that to us, and I hope that we get to do it again.
All right, that's great feedback. Thank you.
So one last comment, if
Yes.
you don't mind, Madam Chairman. What's really interesting about this is what a good model this has been on how to work together with diverse groups and work together with the city to put on an event and define the problems there might be, find solutions to the problems, positive solutions to the problems. So I would also applaud the Young Professional Network, and in this case, Court and his group, on how closely they've been able to work together. And it could provide some guidance for other groups that might want to put on similar type events.
Yes, thank you for that feedback. I have said several times that I would love to see some sort of basic template for this type of event. I know it's very daunting what you guys have been through, the amount of work and effort that goes into it, and if the city has sort of a rudimentary idea of what people need to bring to the table and what the city can bring to the table in order for more of these events to happen, I think they're really invaluable for our downtown and the success of all of the businesses down here. So, any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I would ask.
There's one.
Oh, come on up to the microphone. Just please state your name and address again for the minute taker.
Sure. Gail Summers, 5 Orchard Street in Keene. One, I want to echo what Danya had just said. I think this was a very great event for the local restaurants and businesses. So I'd like to see that happen again. And we had a very successful event, no incidents. So I think, like you, it would be good also to see sort of what worked best so we could copy that. It was just really administratively, I think, my understanding is that the event is going to be on June 4th, but I haven't heard that stated officially. So if we could
Confirm,
that.
June 4th,
Yes.
11:30 to 4. We have talked about potentially doing a rain date on the 5th, but we haven't gone too far down that path, because it's very difficult to move an event like this.
Yes, and when you hear the motion that we're recommending get put forward tonight, some of those details will be in there, and you'll also get to see a lot of the specifics that the city has asked to have in place. And then there will be an opportunity too, if there are more questions on all of those items.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So before you motion, one last thing, and I'll take my shot while I'm here. I don't know if I'll get up here again for quite some time.
You're
I-
welcome back anytime, Matt.
I know, but not in Court's seat. I really want to thank also the city clerk's office, Terry Hood especially, for her keeping these events going and keeping the meetings going. She's done an amazing job as I watch her do it more and more as we go through the events. And I just figured I would mention that for the record.
You stole all my thank yous. The city staff has been incredible to work with through this whole thing for us. Yeah.
There are going to be lots more opportunities, I think,
Okay.
maybe at the end of the event, you can.
Okay, we'll come back.
Madam Chairman, I do want to make a suggestion, though, based upon Councilor Remy's comment. Even though it's difficult to move the event, if you do need or want to move the event, the discretion should probably be included in the motion at this point, so we don't have to come back again. So my suggestion would be June 4th, 2022, with a rain date of June 5th, 2022, at the discretion of the applicant. So that way they can work with the city directly and not have to come back to the city council.
Sounds ideal.
Okay.
Okay, and so, any additional comments or questions? All right, so when we get, Councilor Remy?
Just if you want to volunteer and help out with it, please let us know. If you know anybody who might want to sponsor the event, we are still looking for sponsors for the event. My soft pitch on the other side of please come hang out, assuming we get the approval and the nod, but that's.
So, well, with that being said, how do people get a hold of you? How do they find out? Is there a website? Is there an email?
Yep, so the Keene Young Professionals website, I'll let you.
Yeah, I was gonna say the best way is probably your email, so keenypn@gmail.com, or you can direct message us through our Facebook page, that works as well.
Okay, fabulous. All right, and at this point, I would entertain a motion.
Might be the longest motion I've ever entertained. So move to recommend that Keene Young Professionals Network be granted permission to use downtown city's right-of-way on Saturday, June 2nd, 2022, with the rain date, June 4th, why did?
All those twos.
Saturday, June 4th, 2022, with a rain date of June 5th, 2022, subject to the discretion of the applicant, to conduct a food festival conditional upon the following: the furnishing of a certificate of liability insurance in the amount of $1 million, naming the city of Keene as an additional insured, the signing of a standard revocable license and indemnification agreement, that the petitioner agrees to absorb the cost of any city services over and above the amount of city funding allocated to the event, and agrees to remit said payment within 30 days of the date of the invoicing, that the footprint and layout of the event shall encumber the traveled portions of Central Square, Main Street, both sides from Central Square to Railroad Street and Gilboa Avenue, and a portion of Railroad Street. Road closures may include any portions of other streets needed to facilitate detour routes. The full extent of road closures and detour routes shall be agreed upon with city staff. That the petitioner is permitted to place porta potties in city parking spaces located at the base of Washington Street from Friday, June 3rd, 2022 to Monday, June 6th, 2022, which will be chained together and affixed to ensure they are not vandalized while unattended overnight. That the actual event will be held from 11:30 a.m. to 4 p.m., with the times for setup and cleanup to be established with city staff. That free parking be granted under the provisions of the free parking policy for city parking spaces on Washington Street needed for storage of equipment from Friday, June 3rd, 2022 to Monday, June 6th, 2022, and spaces within the event footprint on the day of the event. The submittal of signed letters of permission from any private property owners for the use of their property, and said permission is granted subject to obtainment of any necessary licenses or permits in compliance with all laws and compliance with any recommendations of city staff.
Second. I have a motion from Councilor Giacomo and a second by Councilor Ahmad. So do we have any questions about that motion? I understand that was very lengthy. If you need to go over any parts of it.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. If for any reason it got switched to Sunday, I wonder how that would collide with church services that wouldn't be over yet. Would we lose people? That'd be my concern.
There is especially for the church in Central Square, we would want to make sure we're coordinating with them so that they're aware of our timing. Our timing is later than most. It's in the afternoon, so we miss some of the morning services. We are not blocking off their lot behind it in any way, so they're still able to use their lot. But there definitely would be coordination so they don't have, a wedding or anything dumping out onto Central Square in the middle of a food festival.
And thank you, sir. And that would also include the Unitarian Church?
Yeah, any of the churches there, and the churches that we're specifically focused on them because they're within the footprint of the shutdown. But it may impact our traffic. There may be folks busy doing other things, but we're really only focused on ones within our footprint that we would be coordinating with.
Thank you very much.
Anyone have any questions on the motion? All right, seeing none, I would ask for a vote. All in favor? And that is unanimous.
Thank you very much.
You are very welcome. We're excited to see it back. Okay, so Councilor Remy, I don't know that you need to go very far. I believe you are up on the next item as well. This is Councilor Remy, Bosley and Giacomo's. Rules of Order, Section 4 Quorum and Remote Participation item. So this item was referred back to PLD after it spent quite a bit of time at FOP. I think that this was a letter that was put into council before the pandemic began, before there were technology that the city had actually acquired to support the council work through the pandemic. So it's definitely timely that it's coming back now. I think that we have a little bit of more of an opportunity to speak to it with some teeth, because we actually have some backing from the state, and we have some equipment here in council chambers that will support us making this change. Councilor Remy, do you want to speak to this at all to get us started?
Sure. So Councilor Remy, at large, Councilor, I don't know if I need to do that again, but the intent of this, when we started allowing remote participation in the beginning of COVID, this was actually just a little bit into the pandemic when we submitted this letter. We had started doing it, and it was asking for the ability to continue doing that after the pandemic had ended, after the emergency order had ended, because at that point we had kind of proven that we were capable of doing it. There are bumps to it, you have technical difficulties every once in a while, but for the vast majority of the time it worked perfectly and it worked as expected. The original reason for submitting this for me personally was largely around it gives you a broader group of folks that are able to potentially hold the seats that we hold today. Because it is very difficult to be, for me, a person who travels for work, for folks on council, being parents, being people that are busy otherwise with different things that are going on in their lives that may pull them to different places or not be able to be here for some specific reason. It might be, your car broke down tonight. There could be all kinds of different reasons. For me personally, that I don't necessarily see the need to limit the reasons. I understand why some folks want to, and I see that there could be an abuse there. Personally, I don't think that anyone who is abusing the remote participation is going to get reelected. So I think that's really where the accountability comes in for that. I appreciate the interest in putting restrictions on there, saying they can't be vacations more than 2 weeks, things that have been talked about for different rules changes. But my position on it is largely, I think it's something that will allow us to broaden the folks who can do this job. And any step we can take in that direction would be a great thing.
Great, thank you. Councilor Johnson, do you have anything to add?
I've been reading through some of the drafts that we've had on here, and the one thing that I agree with the number of things that you could list that I'd consider to be a reasonable reason to not be able to make a meeting. Certainly, they could go on forever, and so trying to outline every single specific one of them is kind of fruitless, but also keeping it as tight as has been proposed is also, I think, a little bit, I think it doesn't necessarily accomplish what the original intent of this was, which is to open this up and make council more accessible to people that cannot always be there. Again, I'm especially thinking about parents, and because there's nothing in here that has anything like that, unless death in the family is the only thing that has anything to do with family on here, and I don't want that being the only reason. So I think that's one thing I think it somewhat missed. It didn't quite hit where I was hoping that it would hit. We know that physical disability, certainly that affected me recently. I had to miss a meeting completely, but I feel that because council already has attendance rules, I understand that there is a great need to be contributing to every meeting, and because we were elected for that, we were elected to cast our votes, to be here and to contribute to the meetings. If I had the ability to do it at that point, I would have done it in a heartbeat. And I think that there's a big change from then to now. We've fine-tuned a lot of our remote participation that we weren't able to do in the early days of the pandemic. We ironed out a lot of the issues that we had, and I think if anything, this is more relevant now than it even was back then. So that's my thoughts about it. I think there's some tweaks that need to happen still, but in general, that's why we came forward with this to begin with.
So I would also just like to remind everyone that the previous Planning Licenses and Development Committee did do a lot of work with our city attorney to draft some language that we brought before council. and it was edited on the council floor and didn't make the final cut for our rules of order last year. So we do have sort of this draft verbiage before us this evening, and I think we need to really go through it and be very thoughtful, because this is not an item that I want to see get back to council and fall apart before our eyes. I think that ultimately we need to have some form of allowance for remote participation. There are all different types of reasons. I'm not going to say that I know the perfect language that needs to be in here tonight. I think we can start to flush some of that out over the next few minutes during our conversation. But to Councilor Giacomo's point, I brought my daughter to a meeting and parked her in a chair. I'm also chairing the meeting. It's important that I'm here. But in a different situation, someone who didn't have childcare might be able to participate remotely. Maybe some of these decisions need to be at the chair's discretion. Maybe we need to outline some broader things that would always be, that always would make an accommodation for remote participation, and then leave an opportunity for chairs to have discretion. There was a conversation that was had this evening about road conditions and councilors being able to get here this evening, and could we allow for remote participation? Currently, I believe the state rule is that with a quorum present in the room, and city attorney, correct me if I'm wrong, that we are allowed to hold remote participation for committee members as long as a quorum is present in the room. But our council has made it very clear that we want to have some guidelines set around this. So we can also beat this to death tonight, and we can send it up to council next Thursday, and we can watch it all happen again in this room. So I think we need to be conscientious of that as we're talking about it. Does anyone, Councilor Remy?
Just one highlight that actually came up during something that Councilor Giacomo said. So this, or maybe you said it, but this came up before, and did not make the final cut. I just want to highlight one of the arguments that was made against it is that the council, if you're absent from the meeting, the council will represent your interests on your behalf.
Right.
That vote failed by one vote.
Right.
And I wonder where that one person would have voted, but that could have made the difference of passing remote participation. And Councilor
100%.
Omrad, you were actually the one who was absent from that. That if you had voted to pass, it would have made a difference in that.
100%.
So that's my point, being that we don't always all vote the same way, and that one vote does matter, and that's why I want to be able to allow those folks to participate. And that's really, it's a point case on that, the fact that this particular language did not pass by one vote.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've had a few short years on council now, and I've got to see most recently a split vote at our city council because we had a member missing, and so it really does go to show that every vote matters, and I think that matters in greater elections and when we're voting on things at committee. And I personally have voiced that I like to see this as broad as possible, and I think we let the public tell counselors when they think that it's being abused by not re-electing them. But I do understand, and I'm willing to compromise and find some sort of happy medium where everyone is comfortable with some version of this moving forward. Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think today really said it. When I looked outside, I thought, how am I going to drive in this? I mean, it was really scary. At that time, the chunks were coming down. And if the road's not plowed, and so I got in touch with our chair. She was kind enough to come and get me with a four-wheel drive, but she also mentioned to me how hard it was for her to get off her own hill without going in the ditch. So this was extreme, okay? Another time when I wanted to come in by Zoom was I had COVID, a part of the COVID, and I really didn't want to miss the meeting. There's something about missing that makes a disconnection. And to me, it's really important to be a part of it, and it also helps if you're not feeling well, because it helps you still feel connected. So I would certainly hope that we could do something about this. I don't believe in missing meetings. I think that if we can be here, we should do everything we can. But my chair, if she wouldn't have picked me up tonight, I'd have been, up that creek. And anyhow, so that's my 2 cents worth.
Great. Thank you, Counselor Johnson. Counselor Ormerod?
Yes, I'd like to remind the audience that this applies to all. I'd like to remind the audience, thank you, that this applies to all committees and commissions, correct?
No.
Only to this.
Only for the city.
And
This rule only applies to the city council and its committees.
the 3 or the 4, does it apply to the joint committee?
Good question. It applies to half of the joint committee.
Okay. All right, all
We're
right.
not going to say which one.
Well, very good. We put a lot of work and effort into writing a statement of diversity and inclusion. And I think we really need to show that we are up to date, up to speed on where that thinking is. And I have served on other boards where there are people not with only temporary disability, but permanent disabilities. And they contributed, sometimes remotely and sometimes in other ways. We want to have participation from people who have younger families as well, too. And a third thing we have to remember is that there are rules for participation. And if a body puts up rules that put up barriers to that participation, they're interfering with our ability to fulfill our duty, which is, and we don't get paid, which is one representation of that, but we should not put up undue barriers when the technology exists, the will exists, and we have a number of ways to do this. So I would strongly support this amendment, and it needs to be in the bylaws so that people can be debating it during elections if they want to. You can bring up other people's participation if you feel that you need to and not re-elect, but we need to be more inclusive and take advantage of the technology. We need to live in this world where many businesses are running remotely. They're running global operations, they're running local operations. So I believe that we need to align with the interest of our constituents and operate in the same way that they do.
Thank you, Counselor Ormerod. So it sounds like we have some consensus happening at the committee level. I'm going to get to public comment here in just a second, but I would like for us, I hope everyone has read through this thoroughly. I feel like the language is fairly broad. It does start to get into physical attendance shall be deemed to not be reasonably practical in the event of, and that's where I wonder if there is any altering that this committee wants to see happen to any of that language. Or do we want to send it back up to council the way it sits? Counselor Joffro?
Yeah, certainly. The rest of that, I think, it makes sense. It seems to be very rational. When it goes into reasonably practical, it's then I think when we start getting into some pretty subjective stuff. And I am not a person that loves subjective language in anything, as you know. And so I think that's the part after which I think that we need to figure out what's happening there. And there might be some legal questions here as well with this. Is exactly, obviously we need a quorum still present regardless, and that goes without saying. And that, well, it is said right at the very beginning of this, but is there any legal reason why discretion of the chair or discretion of a vote of the people present is not an effective way of saying this is okay that they are going to participate remotely? I read a whole page and I can't spit out words. Yeah. So, anyways, that's a question for Attorney Mullins.
Well, we always fall back on the statute that authorizes this in the first place. And what it says is a public body may. Now, the chair, you can write into this that the chair has discretion. 2 issues with that. First is if there's consensus, like happens oftentimes, nobody objects. You just do whatever the result of the decision of the chair is. But the body itself can always challenge the decision of the chair under a proper motion to do that. And then the only other caution on it is, this is a very minor factor, but oftentimes we stumble over too much discretion at that point, because you can always envision a situation where the discretion may be used sometimes not appropriately.
Right.
Let's put it that way. So you can write it in. I think the better practice, again, back to your statement, Counselor, about being careful about ambiguity, that opens up huge ambiguity at that point. But you can do it.
Councilor Remy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would challenge that potentially you could say physical attendance shall be deemed to not be reasonably practical, if I can speak, at the discretion of the counselor, or at the discretion of the member of the body, and leave it to saying that I can say that I can't reasonably be present, and that's the decision making. At that point, I'm making a statement to the council that I can't reasonably be present. And that way you're taking out the restrictions on it. It's up to the individual, and it puts it back to the fact that if I abuse that, I'm not going to get reelected.
Madam Chair, just the only comment on that is to remember, sure, the individual can say, it's not reasonably practical for me to be at the meeting, I'm sorry, but it's still at the discretion of the body whether to allow that or not.
Right, so in the state statute, every time a remote participation request is made, the body still has to vote. So the way that, my understanding is, the way that the statute is written, for instance, if I had had a request this evening for someone to participate remotely, I would have opened the meeting, I would have had language that where I explained that there had been a request made for remote participation, and then I would have had to have asked my committee members for a vote of confidence in that or not.
Well, again, back to the discretion issue. Things can happen by consensus. You state the issue, you say, I'd be inclined to allow remote participation unless there's an objection. If nobody objects, then that's an action of the body at that point. So you don't always have to call each one of these to a vote.
And do you have to identify the person's reasonably practical?
The individual is supposed to state, where they are and the basis for their not being able to attend under the statute. Yes.
Okay.
A question, would it be reasonably defensible to say that by a supermajority or 10 folks of us having to approve this change to the rules of order, that we are therefore authorizing that? That would be a question. I don't know I'm guessing it's a question for the city attorney, that by approving this, the body is approving those absences by approving this change.
So is the approval of this rule amendment authority for every request being authorized going forward?
The individual still has to state why, and if you have a rule, it would have to fall within the parameters of that rule at that point. So they still have to state it, and the body still has a right to not approve that request at that point. This is only sort of a guideline for you to consider the request. Does it fall within the particular parameters? Yes. But there still may be some reason why the body decides that, the action isn't appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Councilor Johnson?
Thank you. I'd just like to add something that also was helpful for me today. I'm a member of the Heritage Committee, which comes from the City Council. We have a member on the Heritage. And all of a sudden I knew, oh my goodness, I have a meeting, but I can't go out in this. I got in touch with them. They had us on Zoom in no time. Now, we couldn't vote, but we're working on some huge projects, and it was wonderful to be able to continue that conversation so that we knew we didn't have to stop the process. So I just wanted to throw that out. And there were a lot of us that were able to call in.
So you're just identifying an incident where it was helpful to have the Zoom technology available to you, which, I worry about that every meeting that we have. because there's only 5 of us at these committee meetings, so I've got to get 3 of us in a room. And there are lots of reasons why people have not been able to participate or have future, are going to have future obligations about not being able to participate. So it is a concern of mine, not that remote participation would allow any fixing of that. We still are obligated to have 3 people sitting in this room, but it does allow for some leniency with participation. Like, I would have loved to have allowed Councillor Johnson to participate tonight remotely. She could have definitely participated in this conversation and given her feedback and not had to, be in danger getting herself here. So, any other comments from the committee at this point before we go to the public? Okay, so I would actually open this up to the public at this point. Do we have anyone from the public? Councillor Filial, do you want to come forward?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randy Filio, Keene City Councilor. It's coming from no surprise to you that I'm adamantly opposed to any change to this rule of order. This is one of these things, Keene was incorporated as a city in 1874, and I don't go into it's always been this way, so it should stay this way. But in a way, I guess my feeling is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, I realize we have technology, but just because we have technology doesn't make it better. Right now, we have a 15-member council. Not everybody can make it to every council meeting, as I've stated in the past. And when you can't, if 2 don't make it, the other 13 will pick up the slack so you can come back. I think we open up a can of worms we don't want to be opening up here. Like we've said, 24 hours, you got to get a hold of the mayor or the city manager, let you know you're not going to make it. And then it's up to the prerogative of the rest of the council. Do we allow them or do we not? Boy, I can see a can of worms opening up down the road when you tell one, yeah, you know what, come on in remote. Then the next one, no, maybe not. And then right to the city attorney and right to a lawsuit. I know that some members of the council here, we're just trying to open it up a little bit and, I guess be fair. But I think we're opening up to a potential bunch of lawsuits, basically. But even back to that, my opinion is if you can't make it to the council meeting, you can't make it to the council meeting. Not everybody can make it to a council meeting. For example, if we're trying to open it up to everybody, what do you do to the people that work second shift and they want to be a city councilor? You tell me. We can open it up for them. Do we give them an hour break at work? Can they go in later? So you have a whole group of people in Keene that work second shift that can't be a city councilor that want to be a city councilor. What do you tell them? Sometimes it doesn't work. All of us have had different jobs at different times, and sometimes we can't make it to council meetings. Sometimes we're not feeling well and we don't make it. And sometimes you just have to stay home and the other 12, 13, 14, they'll get it done. But like I said, in the past, it's never been a problem. We get it done. I think it's all just kind of individual egos that want to do this. Like, I have to be out of town all the time. It's like, if you can't make it to the meeting, you can't make it to the meeting. We are the city of Keene. We're not like state reps where you have to drive an hour and a half, 2 hours to get there, through a snowstorm. We all live here in Keene. We can all make it. Been doing it since the 1800s. But like I said, I think we open a can of worms here that we can't even look at the amount of legal issues down the road that we've been opening up. Because once you tell somebody they don't have to be here, that's it. That's it. And, God bless the city attorney because he'll be, or the future city attorney, because I'm sure he'll be out of here by the time that happens. But you're opening up a can of worms that you just don't want to open. For example, you say, I have a job, I can't be there. What happens if you work at home? They have a job at home and they say, I don't want to go to council meetings. I work from home. What do you say to them? Legally, they work from home. Do you tell them they can't show up to the council meeting or they can go remote? There's a lot of questions down the road here that we haven't even touched. And that's my concern. I want to be fair to as many people as I can. But like I said, if there's a meeting that I can't make it to, so be it. You can't make it. I know we want to try to say we want to make it fair to everybody. I think it has been since 1874. I think it's gone really damn well, in this city. But it's never going to be perfect. And I think if you change this rule of order, you're going from imperfect to a lot more imperfect. And I think the only one that's going to be busy is the city attorney. Like I said, You know, who do you tell? Do you tell the guy that's in Chicago, you can go remote? Or do you tell the guy that's on, Elm Street, I work from home, I'm not coming in? So just be careful when you open up a can of worms here, because I think we are opening up a can of worms. You know, I wouldn't even say put it on more time, because we'll kick the can down the road forever. I'm just gonna vote no on this, because I think we have a system that works. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Thank you for your time. I know you've heard this story before, but I
It's okay.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Counselor Filio. I would just like to point out to a couple of your comments that it has worked since the 1800s, maybe, for a certain number of people. And our council has not been diverse at all. And that's kind of sad. And I think we have an opportunity here to change that, or to give a perception to people that they might have some more access to be able to serve in this role in our community. And if we have, if we have that opportunity, why not offer it to people? I also think that we should have some things that are listed here under our reasonably practical, that are things that are very clearly outlined, like health issues, disability, and possibly out-of-town employment responsibilities. And then maybe have I don't know if there's another terminology that could leave a window open for the discretion of the chair, for instance, in a road condition situation, or in a childcare situation. I think there has to be some sort of decision-making process going on. If you're living up on the top of a hill, for instance, like my road had not been plowed today. I was able to get in, but just barely. I almost made contact with the city vehicle on my way in. So if we have a counselor who lives downtown, that might not be a good enough excuse for a chair to be able to say, no, you are a block away, you can make it in. So I would like to have some specifics. I do think that we do not need the chair or someone saying, well, your health issue is more important than your health issue, or your disability is more important than your disability. I think that if a counselor is coming to a chair or to the city and saying, I would like to participate remotely, that there need to be some broad categories of things that we deem acceptable. I think offering this as an accommodation for someone who has a disability is a really important tool to keep us out of a lawsuit, potentially. So, I think to a lot of the points, we've invested in this technology, we own it, why shouldn't we use it? So I don't know, does anyone, I guess at this point, I'm looking for some feedback from the committee on how we could write that section and what we want to see here for what we could send up to full council. Does anyone have any edits? Councilor Giacomo?
Yeah, the vacation for 2 weeks or death in the family, I know that part had been added in there somewhat after the fact of the original, or semi-original. But I think if we just say other extenuating circumstances as approved by, or not approved, but as allowed by the committee
By
chair.
the committee chair, or by the committee as a whole, or what would the attorney say?
Yeah, whatever the.
How would you write that for us?
I just did.
Hey, thank you.
I think you need to keep it within the, sort of the language used by the statute.
Okay.
Okay? So at the end of whatever this list would be, you could say, or otherwise, at the reasonable discretion of the public body.
I like
Right?
it.
So that means that if there's consensus and nobody objects, and the chair said, I would like to let so-and-so participate remotely, everybody says yes, or nobody objects, that's fine, and you can do it. You have some discretion to do that.
Okay.
However, it still preserves the right, which already exists, of a member of the body to object.
To object. Wonderful.
So I would suggest that.
So the committee, Council Ormerod?
I had a question I have a question of clarification. If someone does it, or not if, but when someone objects, is it still up to the chair to make the ruling?
Go ahead, Council, sorry.
Or do we have to have 100% consensus in order to continue?
No, It would be a vote under the rules that exist now. The objection to the chair's decision would be put to a vote, and that's a simple majority.
And the person participating remotely does not vote.
The person participating remotely would not vote, because at that point, they are not considered a member of the body.
Okay. So, as a committee, would we be comfortable at the end of responsibilities, comma, and then inserting Attorney Mullen's language in place of the yellow highlighted portion of the document in front of you?
So just so I'm clear, so that would mean that you would be, right now, the proposed language includes the vacation provision and the death provision. So
No.
basically, you would take that out, or you would
Correct.
you would take that out. But that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I knew how you were thinking about drafting this.
I think because that allows the public body to make those decisions on an individual basis. And it still leaves in protection for health issues, disability, and employment responsibilities, which all seem to get overwhelming support at full council. And then it would allow us some gray area for things like childcare, road conditions, death in the family, that sort of thing.
Yes, and I'm going to sort of tune up myself a little bit in a prior comment. Once this rule is in place, if you have an individual who clearly states that the reason for their not being able to participate is one of the three specifically permitted reasons, then it would be very difficult to say no to that. I think, tuning that up a little, if you were going to say no, though, I think it would require a 2/3 vote, because it is a rule at that point. So if you have an individual that reasonably represents that they're ill or they're away on employment, to object to that, I think would be problematic and would probably take a 2/3 vote.
I'm comfortable with that.
I just want to make sure I was clear. I had to think that through a little bit more from my first comment on that.
How are we feeling at the committee?
Well, I just wanted to say to my good colleague back there, Councilor Filio, I would not have been able to drive here tonight. It wasn't plowed, and I don't want to be left out, okay? That's me. I'm probably the oldest one on the city council, maybe. I think I am. But I know I bring a lot, and I enjoy being here, so I think it gets back to this, good Lord, we're not going to be missing. If we miss, then we don't want to be on the city council.
Right.
So anyhow, I wanted to just throw that out there because I know that my colleague can handle my opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Johnson. Okay, so not seeing any more comments from the committee at this time. I think we've cleaned up the language a little bit. Do we have to, so what would our intention be here? Would we have something that says recommend you draft an amendment? So with the language that we've given you, that amendment, will it come back to PLD or will it?
It will
go straight.
Well, I think about that for a second.
Or can we send this?
No, it would only be, at that point, it's still just a recommendation. I mean, we can have the language available for the council on that Thursday night, but the council has not yet voted to include this into the rules.
Right,
But
so how do we get that done?
you would want a motion, it would be like any other recommendation of the city council. Move to recommend that the city attorney draft an amendment to section 4, quorum and remote participation in accordance with the background notes of the PLD meeting.
Okay.
And then I would, prepare, and we would submit a proposed language with respect to that. But it wouldn't be operative until the city council
Of course.
actually voted.
Yes, of course. Okay.
May I just ask, does our city manager have anything to say about this? Or?
You want to go higher?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking, Counselor. I understand both sides of the issue. I know some communities have really struggled with this. Some have, created some pretty liberal rules around remote participation, and that's created some quorum issues for them. But then I also know other communities that have struggled with this topic haven't invested in the, the equipment that we have in order to make it successful. So I am happy to see some guidelines, because I was a little bit nervous leaving it too vague. it's much easier to go from one committee to the next and understand that if it's for a work reason or a health issue, that I should be able to participate remotely. It's much more difficult if it's just strictly up to the chair every time, so I think you've struck a good balance.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the public wishing to speak on this? Come forward. Name and address, please.
Daniel Lindes, 433 Elm. Is it on?
It should be.
Hello? Hello? I don't know if someone.
Just speak loudly. We can hear you.
Okay. Daniel Lindes, 433 Elm Street, Keene, New Hampshire. I just wanted to remind everyone, and I mean, I wasn't, supposed to stay this long, but I did because it's very interesting. But I wanted to remind everyone how lucky we are for having so many young people in city council. That is not a typical thing in New Hampshire. It's not a typical thing in New England as a whole, and we want to continue that. And I think it's really important and really great to you're even talking about this, but I hope that it passes because I want people in my generation to have the opportunity to be able to raise their voice and talk and feel like they are included. And this is the way that our world is moving. And it's people with young families, they probably want to be on council, but having this opportunity gives them the chance. People, young professionals who travel, same thing. You don't want to close those doors. So I just, this isn't the 1800s. This is 2022. And I think it's really important if we have the technology to be able to utilize it and utilize it well. So
Great. Thank you for those comments. Okay. So I don't see any other comments. At this point, I would entertain a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move to recommend that the city attorney draft an amendment to Section 4 in accordance with the background notes of the PLD committee's discussion.
And I'll second that.
We have a motion by Councillor Giacomo, a second by Councillor Johnson. Any comments on the motion at hand? Councillor Ormond?
Just a clarification. Asking a clarification, this will be prepared for the next cycle of city council.
It will go to the city council as a recommendation. If the city council approves it, it still does have to come back to this committee, because under the rules for amendment, it goes to the city council sends it to the committee at that point, because remember, the council hasn't acted yet on this.
All right.
So, but that would be at that point pretty much just a formality, and it's a formality that's necessary to comply with the rules for amendment.
Okay.
So that's what would have to happen.
All right, thank you.
Although, keep in mind, the council could suspend the rules, because it is a rule, by 2/3 vote, and act on it Thursday night if they want to.
And this is a change to a rule, so it ultimately will require a 2/3 vote as well.
Yes.
Lots of 2/3 votes. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any other comments? Seeing none, I would ask for a vote. All in favor? And that is unanimous. All right. Thank you, everyone. We have one more item. So this last item is an item that I had actually sent in a letter to address with the committee in regards to Section 15 in accordance, in regards to Section 15 conflicts of interest. So there were a couple of sections that I thought we did a lot of work on last year, and this is one of them. The reason that it was important to me, and I had stated this in the past, and I'm just going to briefly go over the moment that I realized that I thought our conflict of interest section needed some tuning up. But it was in regards to a council member requesting to increase a budget for a nonprofit of a board that person sat on. And I was very green at the time. It was my first budget season. It sort of caught me off guard. It happened on the floor. It was very uncomfortable. I wasn't sure what my responsibility was. I think that it was not very spelled out what their responsibility was in letting everyone know that they were requesting an increase in a budget for a board that they sat on without it sitting in front of a full committee, without a conversation. And I realized at that point that we needed to maybe make it a little more clear to everyone what our responsibilities as fellow counselors are when we see things like that happen, and what individuals' responsibilities are in regards to their responsibilities in telling counselors what boards and commissions that they sit on. One of the important things for me during this process was adding the section into the language that you do have a draft regarding, that said, I believe we're calling it here the statement of interests, which shall identify each person in the household or person's employers in any boards and commissions, organizations and associations, or other entity which the person is a member of, and whether or not the person holds a leadership position in that organization. The statements of interest shall be available at the office of the city clerk for public inspection. I also think, we talk a lot about transparency at council, and this is just another opportunity for us to prove that we're being transparent. Some of these things are really great, and I think we always should be erring on the side of caution. The council will decide if you are going to be given your conflict of interest. What's the right word? If you're going to be assigned or allowed a conflict of interest, right? Recused. But to not have the information out there and available for somebody to ask that question, or for you to not put that information out there, I think is where you lose the transparency. So I love the language that we had worked on at committee. I think it really, it was smart and worked for me. I think it just missed the mark because the greater document failed last year, and I'm hoping that this is something we can clean up and get back in front of the full council again. So do we have any questions from the committee at this point? Councilor Giacomo?
Spoke about this real briefly earlier. I was not on the council when this came before the first time. It was during my break. So I did have a pretty serious problem with the first full paragraph here at the end, where it talks about membership in an organization generally and not in a leadership capacity shall not be considered personal conflict of interest. Good with that. The next sentence I find deeply problematic, where a conflict of interest shall be deemed to exist when a counselor's spouse, parent, child, or other member of the counselor's immediate family has a conflict of interest. We just finished defining conflict of interest as either pecuniary or personal. So because you have a child who goes to XYZ program, which happens to be an agency that we send something to, the kid is not getting a benefit out of it. Right. And also, a child isn't restricted to kids. Keep in mind that, again, up until very recently, the majority of our council were well into their 50s and older, and so a kid was, their child is in their 20s or 30s and don't live at home. And so I think that if we're going to have a family clause in here, it has to be strictly pecuniary interest. It has to come back to money only, because otherwise this is going to get real hairy real quick and very gray. And I don't know about, again, I guess children, I understand why it was put in there. The parent, I don't necessarily know why, but I think we can probably pare that list down. And I think spouse or other person who contributes to household income, something like that would be, again, keep it about the finances in this. That sentence really, doesn't quite work with me. But the rest of it, I actually really think this is a good amendment here.
Okay, great. Councilor Ormoran?
I had a similar question about that, and I wanted to make sure that I understood the intent, because it seemed a little far-reaching for children and parents and all of those things, particularly when I have 2 brothers and 3 sisters who live in 3 countries and are in a number of different boards, etc., some of which may at some day decide to move here. And so I really wanted to understand that. It seems that if we want to declare all the boards we're on, do we have to declare all the boards that all of our various people that are related to us? So I was, looking for some clarification and some guidance on that, because it seems pretty onerous. Is it have to be done every January? And let's say that I get off one board, and one board that I'm on is probably gonna exit and sell out, so I would go to another board, and all of a sudden, I was with a small company, but now they sold it to a big global player who happens to be Stantec, and now we're doing business with Stantec and making decisions. So I would like to have some clarification on that. I think the pecuniary interest is probably a good idea. It's a simplifying thing, but I'm really trying to understand what the intent is so that we can have something that's not going to be so onerous.
So I will tell you, in my situation, I did ask the council to recuse me for my spouse's employment over a financial matter because his employer was requesting city funds. And I think I'm not going to say which way I would have voted, but if I had just voted against that, let's say, it could have negatively impacted his employment if his employer thought his wife wasn't being supportive. I don't know. I'm far-reaching, but I imagine that I think with spouses, it definitely, I feel like there's a really close connection there. But parent-child, in my mind, I read adult-child. I don't know why, and I don't know that it matters. I did not go as far as like preschool. I know that's where other minds.
My kids like fire trucks. I can't support the fire department anymore.
Right. So, I guess I would ask the attorney if there's some way we can tune that up.
The answer to that question is yes. This is language that was in the original
Okay.
conflict of interest policy, and remembering the parent, spouse, whatever, and remembering that in the good old days, 3 years ago, there was no sort of personal interest, conflict of interest. It was purely a pecuniary interest. And then over a period of time, questions and concerns were raised about not just the financial aspects, but also the personal aspects. So that's one of the reasons why it now includes this kind of personal aspect. The old rule included the fiduciary obligations. Now, for a lot of people, what's that mean? You know, you gotta be a lawyer sometimes to figure out whether there's a fiduciary obligation or not. But you don't have to be a lawyer to look at an individual who may be voting on something and they're the chairman of the board of whatever is going to be receiving the money. Everybody gets that. So the language was a way to try and move away from the fiduciary aspects of this and to put it in a more generalized personal aspect that people can understand. Back to the specific point, I can craft language that basically says that for spouse, parent, child, or other member of the household, that it does have to be a pecuniary interest. So you can remove that issue. I'll have to wordsmith it a little bit, but I can do that. And the reason why that language was in there before, and it wasn't whether or not it was an adult child or a non-adult child, it was just whether or not in that situation with a pecuniary interest, is the child, even if it's a minor child, if the child is gaining some financial advantage from the action in your household or even outside your household, that's a conflict. But I can craft it to make it specific to pecuniary interest.
I think that does help a lot. I still have some questions about the burden of compliance about the declaration of interests. If we're a shareholder in a place, often those are private and you would not be able to disclose that. You could say you are a shareholder, but you wouldn't necessarily, I would not expect there to be the amount of shares that you're held on that. So I'm trying to understand what the intent of that was. Also trying to understand is, let's say that you are an investor and you invest thematically. If you handle that through a third party, does that clear you from the fiduciary? So just, a couple of the clarifications on that as well too, because one thing we want to do is we want to have people who want to invest in the community, bring more business, do more economic development, grow the tax base, and provide the quality of life. And I think if we have some clarification on that, it would help. So I'd asked our attorney on this, on kind of what the intent and what the burden is of what the scope of the declaration of interest would be.
It's fairly narrow, actually.
Okay.
And it was modeled to some extent, but only to a small extent, on the statement that's required by individuals for the state of New Hampshire who sit on boards. I have to fill one out every year because I sit on the Department of Employment Security's appellate board. But this applies to, you have to identify who your employer is. I work for whatever, John's motorcycle shop. That would be nice. But that doesn't mean that if you're a shareholder in a corporation, that doesn't apply, right? It's just whether it's your employer. And the second one is board, commission, organization, or association on which you're a member. So if you happen to be a member of the Kiwanis, you write that down. If you happen to be on the board of GM, you write that down. But that doesn't mean anything yet. It only means something if you hold a leadership position in that organization. So if you're on the board of General Motors, you would say, I'm on the board of General Motors. Well, you are out in a leadership position on General Motors. That's all you would have to disclose at that point. It doesn't reach any further than that. At least that's the intention. And I think that's the way it's drafted, and that's the reason why it's drafted like that.
And how, does it have to be updated annually or at the beginning of your term, or?
Annually,
So.
every January.
So let's say that I'm on a board that gets acquired by GM or something like that. And so I've got a contract on the board serving in an advisory capacity with that. Do I have to notify immediately, or do I just have to look every January and say there's been an update? What's the intent?
There are two reasons for this.
Okay.
One is to let the world know to the extent that they want to know, right? You only have to update it once every year in January. However, you know your own personal circumstances. If during the year your personal circumstances change and you fall within the conflict of interest policy, it's incumbent on that individual, you as a counselor, to let us know that. Let the city clerk know that, let the council know that, and then have the council make a determination as to whether or not it is a conflict of interest. So you only have to make the disclosure once, but every time during the year something changes, or you get on a new board, or you drop a board, or whatever, if you trigger the conflict of interest policy, you must let us know that, let the council know that.
And I think it only really happens when a negotiation or a financial matter comes before council, right? So, I think Keene YPN is a good example, right? We have counselors who sit on the Keene YPN board, and them coming before us and asking for a license. There's no financial gain for Keene YPN for that license. Them going to FOP and asking for funds, that's a different conversation. And I think that those are the subtle nuances that need to get sort of exposed on when it's appropriate to say you have a conflict of interest and when it's not. And if we all decided to err on the side of caution, let the council decide. I mean, just put it out there and say, I would rather everyone know than sit here quietly with the knowledge that I might be doing something that, would not be conceived as transparent.
All right. Thank you. I could go for that. The employer thing is a little bit more difficult because I'm self-employed, and as many people are, and I have sources of passive income. So that gets to be a little bit onerous to list all those, so.
You only have to list, if you are self-employed, I am self-employed.
Okay.
That's it. No clients, no, we want to see all your 1099. No, that's all you have to do. What I will do in that paragraph, though, that just jumped out at me, is the word household. Again, this is, I believe, partly from some of the other language, but that is not defined. So what I will do when I deal with the pecuniary interest for spouse, parent, child, or other member of the counselor's immediate family, I'm going to make that a defined phrase and call that household. So when you get down into the last paragraph, it will be that same group of people.
Okay. And also in housekeeping item, under quorum and remote participation, there's also reference to chairman.
Yes, I've already corrected that. Yeah.
Councilor Zankovo?
Yeah, I think as in anything, you can, obviously, there are a lot of devils in details here, but with regards to the board thing, the YPN one actually presents a really curious situation also, because the Keene Young Professionals Network is not its own organization. It is merely a sub-organization under Hannah Grimes, who is the actual fiscal agent for us. So the fund, the money for the festival actually wasn't even going. The whole thing got very squirrely potentially. I don't worry about it anymore because I'm not on their board, but.
I heard you aged out.
Yeah, I did.
Uh-oh.
It's a dirty rumor.
We've been talking a lot about age
But
tonight.
But what that does bring up, though, is that no one on our board, or one person on our board, is on the Hannah Grimes board, who is actually the one who controls the checkbook, the bank accounts, and everything. We have our bank account, which is ours, but they are still our 501c3 sponsor and everything. So, anyways, there might be some other weirdness that could arise with this, but at the end of the day, it's about being honest and declaring what you can to be open about it. And last year for the FOP meeting, for the vote on the money, Councilor Remy and I both offered to recuse ourselves, and I think they voted to recuse us, right? Yeah, but it was a split vote. So half the council didn't really have a problem. The other half said, might as well for optics, and we said sure. So I think that's
Right.
It's about honesty. It's not about trying to find loopholes here, and I think most people recognize that.
100%. And I think that that ultimately you just want to walk away from making these decisions feeling like feeling good about the fact that everyone came to the table with good intentions. That's it for me. And I do believe that even in the situation that I spoke about earlier, there were no bad intentions there. And but it just didn't feel right. And so I think for public, the way that the public looks at this, there can be any way of spinning any of these things, and we're all human. And if we can just do as good as we can every day, then that's all you can do. So I think this is a good move forward. And I'm guessing similar to the last item, we'll have some sort of draft that'll come up to council.
Yes.
And then it will come back down to PLD for one more look-see.
Unless you all suspend the rules and just adopt that one. Up to you.
Okay. So do we have anyone from the public wishing to speak? Councilor Remy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike Remy, Councilor at Large. The only thought I have is when you get into the employment, it's something similar to what Councilor Romer brought up around sources of income sources of substantial income might be more relevant, because if I get $1 million check from, more parks is good, I think I should be declaring that I'm getting a check from a park organization every year, which is influencing my decision on making more parks in the city, making it a thing, right? But if I'm getting paid substantially by some organization that may not be my employer, that might influence my decisions, that's also a conflict of interest. I get that that's getting into almost campaign stuff, and that's a little bit different, but it's definitely a conflict. I just don't know how to phrase it in the right way. So.
Thank you for that. Well, we have a wonderful city attorney that's going to work it out for us.
Well, I want to make sure I understand the question. So, just so I'm clear, what you're saying is if for some reason you are receiving funding in some fashion from, like your example was an organization that builds parks, right? And there was a matter before the council dealing with some change to the city parks, that may trigger a conflict of interest for you?
Yeah, if I was if there was an organization that was basically, Parks is a really difficult example, but if, I can make a really easy one. If I was getting, well, actually it doesn't apply for cities pieces, but similar to, if Luca was paying me $1 million a year for the restaurant, right? To say, hey, I want to support you as a counselor.
Oh, is it campaign contribution?
No, just, yes, sure, as a campaign contribution, call it campaign contribution, is a source of income. And then I came before council and he came up before the council, I think I have a conflict if he came before council asking for something on behalf of the restaurant. I get that that's the point of the campaign contribution, but it's like, that's not, I don't think any of us are getting substantial campaign contributions, but I think to Raleigh's point around, there are other sources of income that can generate conflicts, is where I'm trying to go.
I guess I'm gonna have to default, because at some point you can't draft over everything, right? I have to default back to what we just talked about. You have to act in good faith.
Right.
And if you are not going to act in good faith, there's no policy in the world that can catch that, unless, somebody calls you out in some other manner. So, I mean, I guess that's the point, We don't want to make this so complicated that it's hard to understand and apply. And I think that the high points of risk are, you're getting money directly for whatever is before the council, you shouldn't vote on it. That's really clear. Or in the personal interest would kind of fall into that one, whereas you have a personal interest that isn't necessarily pecuniary directly to the action, but you have a personal interest in that, and it would fall within that requirement, seems to me.
Right. I mean, I don't know if, I'm just going to use this as an example. I don't know if it goes as far as what you're saying, but let's say that you had a piece of real estate and you wanted to sell it. It's not your employment selling real estate, but you wanted to sell it to the city. I don't think you should vote on that, right? Whether or not we should do that. That's
Yeah, that would be a pecuniary interest.
right. But invariably, that's what you're saying. Like, if you have an interest in some sort of organization and you are choosing to, there's a contract with the city that's negotiated. I think we sort of talked about that, right? Like, it doesn't just have to be a board. If you have an interest in an organization that's negotiating a contract with the city, you should probably not vote on that. City manager.
I think what we're trying to get to is, even if it's not your employer, but let's say you're self-employed and you have a contract with Stantec. You work for them, you get a substantial amount of money from them, and they have a contract before the city. And so would that be what you're trying to get at in terms of a financial interest, but not a
Directly.
direct employer?
Yeah, that's I'm trying to figure out how to account for the fact that there are other things outside of that, and it's when I think about it from the statement of interest, right? The things that you're involved in.
That's the
like,
problem.
And how do you phrase
Like,
that?
how far do you go?
Remember, we're conflating we're conflating things at this point,
Yeah.
right? The language with respect to pecuniary interest is fairly broad and would cover the situation that the city manager just explained.
Yes.
It would not fall into a statement of interest, potentially, because it doesn't fall into one of those categories. And all that statement of interest is for is to kind of alert the world and the council as to what these areas are.
Right.
It does not remove the obligation for the individual to state that they have a conflict of interest.
Right. Which goes back to, I think, education of the council about this particular rule and cleaning up some of the language and making sure everybody just knows where they stand with it and what the expectation is. I mean, that's a lot of things to absorb as a new counselor, and I think ongoing education about parts of these rules is important also.
I have just one question.
Counselor
We
Donovan.
have two of our wonderful counselors now that are on the Department of, or in the education in Keene.
Three.
Now, could they have a
Three.
point where they wouldn't be able to, I guess I'd throw that in the pile.
Well, but remember, again, it's a pecuniary interest in a private financial matter that's not generally available to the public, right? It's the same reason why you can vote on the budget.
even though you're taxpayers. It's the same reason why you can vote on the zoning ordinance, even though you may be subject to the zoning ordinance. It's the same reason they can vote on the school budget and on the state, on the city's budget, because it generally applies in that kind of context. Would they need to state that they are on the school board? Yes.
How about the Wilson Dam project?
That would present a more direct issue, because that's a direct cost issue to their
Right.
employer, and not to the board
To
that
their
they're on.
board,
So
right.
it would fall into that same kind of category.
Mhm.
If you're in a leadership position on a board that's going to benefit from it, then yeah, they should recuse.
Okay. And I know we could come up with a million scenarios, right? But I think that the fact that we're having the conversation is the most important part. Because it plants all of these seeds with people, and then they can go to Tom and ask the question, which is, we want Tom's phone ringing all over the time.
And then we'll do what Patty does sometimes and throw the chicken bones on the table and see where they are. It works.
There you go.
Okay, so do we have any other comments? We have some direction here, I think, and we don't see anyone from the public wishing to speak, so I would entertain a motion.
I'll move to recommend the city attorney draft an amendment to section 15 in accordance with the background notes of the PLD committee's discussion.
Second.
We have a motion by Counselor Giacomo, a second by Counselor Ormerod. Do we have any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I would ask for a vote. All in favor? And that is unanimous. And we got to our rules of order and we cleared the room out.
Wow. That was a
So,
wonderful conversation.
I think we've had a great agenda this evening, everyone, and this meeting is adjourned.